Emma sat in the campus cafe with a book open in front of her, the pages filled with underlined sentences she had not read once. Students moved around her in soft noise and careless laughter, cups clinked, chairs scraped, sunlight spilled through tall windows. It was a normal afternoon in a normal place, and yet her mind was nowhere near it. Her thoughts kept circling back to one man. Julian. Daniel's best friend, the man who had been part of her life for as long as she could remember, yet had always remained just out of reach. He was the one who stood slightly apart at family gatherings, watching more than speaking, the one who never smiled unless something caught him off guard. When he did smile just briefly, it felt like witnessing something private, almost forbidden, like seeing armor crack. Emma had grown up knowing him as Daniel's friend, the serious one, the reliable one, the one her parents trusted without question. But over the past year, something had shifted, not just in her, but in the way the world around her started making sense. The truth did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments, in half-finished conversations she overheard when Daniel thought she was asleep, in the way certain people went quiet when Julian entered a room, in the sudden ease with which problems disappeared from their family's life, threats that never fully formed, doors that opened without explanation, protection that was always there, silent and absolute. Daniel's career had taken off faster than anyone expected. Their family never worried about safety, even when the city around them grew darker. Emma began to understand that none of it was coincidence. Julian was not just successful. He was powerful. Not the kind of power that announced itself, not loud or flashy. It was the kind that moved beneath the surface, unseen but undeniable, the kind that reshaped outcomes before anyone realized a choice had been made, the silent authority behind the city's fragile order. When Emma finally allowed herself to name it, the realization settled in her chest with a strange calm. Julian was not a businessman, that was only the mask. He was something far more dangerous and far more controlled. What unsettled her most was not the danger. It was the loneliness. She saw it in the way he never stayed long, in the way his eyes tracked exits before faces, in the way his voice lowered when conversations turned personal, as if intimacy itself were a risk he had learned to manage. Emma's fascination was no longer just desire, it was psychological. She wanted to understand how a man could hold so much power and yet live as if he were constantly bracing for loss. Curiosity turned into intention the day she learned where he lived. Daniel mentioned it casually without meaning to. A skyline apartment, top floors, heavy security, a place described with pride and unease at the same time. Emma looked it up later, her fingers steady, her breath shallow, glass and steel rising above the city like a watchtower, not a home. A fortress. She studied it the way some people studied maps before crossing borders. She noticed the patterns, the times the lights changed, the rhythm of security shifts, the names of buildings nearby, even the elevator system, private and coded, designed to keep the wrong people out. Without fully admitting it to herself, Emma memorized everything. And then she realized what she was doing. This was not a harmless crush. This was not a fantasy built on distance and safety. She was planning something that could not be undone, something that crossed lines she had been raised to respect. She knew enough now to understand that entering Julian's world meant stepping into danger, whether he wanted her there or not. The day she went, the sky was clear and indifferent. Emma stood across the street from the building, her heart steady in a way that surprised her. She expected fear, panic, second thoughts. Instead, she felt clarity. The entrance doors reflected her back at herself, not a girl pretending to study, not a sister standing safely behind her brother's shadow, a woman making a choice. She could walk away, she knew that. She could go back to her campus, her books, her predictable future. She could let Julian remain what he had always been in her life, distant, untouchable, protected by silence. But Emma had never been good at living with unanswered questions. She crossed the street, pushed through the doors, and stepped inside. As the elevator doors closed behind her and the numbers began to rise, Emma understood one undeniable truth. Some doors once opened change everything. And she had decided, with full awareness of the risk, to open this one anyway. Emma stepped out of the elevator, and the first thing she felt was silence, not the calm kind, but the heavy, controlled kind that pressed against her skin like a warning. The hallway was wide and empty, with soft lights recessed into the ceiling and walls that absorbed sound instead of reflecting it. There were no decorations, no signs of life, no sense that anyone truly lived here. It felt less like a residence and more like a boundary between worlds. Emma took a slow breath and reminded herself to keep walking. Each step forward made her more aware of everything she had chosen to ignore before. The faint hum of electricity behind the walls, the subtle click she heard when she passed certain points, the way the air itself seemed measured. She realized the apartment was watching her long before its owner would. This place was designed to notice movement, to remember patterns, to protect something precious or dangerous, or both. Her heart beat faster, but her posture stayed calm because fear would only make her stand out. When she reached the door, she stopped, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood the weight of the moment. This was not knocking on a normal door. This was crossing into a life built on secrets. Emma lifted her hand and pressed the code she had memorized late at night while telling herself she would never use it. The lock opened with a quiet sound, too smooth, too intentional. Inside the apartment, the space opened. Wide glass walls revealed the city stretched beneath her like a living map of lights and shadows, but the beauty did not soften the atmosphere. The furniture was arranged with precision, not comfort. Every surface was clean, untouched, almost sterile. It was the home of someone who stayed ready, not someone who relaxed. Emma felt a strange ache in her chest as she realized how alone this place felt. A distant sound broke the stillness. Metal against metal, slow, deliberate, repeated. Emma followed it down a corridor, her steps careful, her senses sharp. The sound grew louder until she reached a room partially hidden by dark glass. Inside, Julian moved with controlled force, his body tense, focused, his attention entirely on the task before him. He was not exercising for health or appearance. He was training for survival. When he noticed her, his reaction was immediate and raw. His body stilled, his gaze snapped to her, and for a split second all control vanished from his face. It was not anger that surfaced first, but fear, sharp and unfiltered. Emma saw it clearly before he buried it behind discipline. The silence stretched between them, heavy and dangerous. He asked how she got inside, and his voice was low, restrained, edged with something she had never heard before. Emma answered calmly, her words steady even though her pulse raced. She watched his eyes study her, not with desire yet, but with calculation and concern. He was measuring risk, and she understood then that his world did not allow for surprises, especially not human ones. Julian told her she should not be there, that it was not safe, that she did not understand. Emma listened but did not retreat. She told him she wanted to talk, that she wanted to understand him, not the rumors, not the masks. Something shifted in his expression, not softness yet, but conflict. After a long moment, he stepped aside just enough to let her stay. They moved into the kitchen, where he prepared coffee with careful ritual, as if grounding himself through routine. Emma watched his hands, noticed how steady they were, how practiced. This was a man who survived by control. When he finally spoke again, his tone was quieter, more guarded. He told her she could stay for one cup only. As she held the warm cup between her palms, Emma realized something that made her chest tighten. Julian was not dangerous because he was cruel. He was dangerous because he was alone, and men like that built empires to avoid feeling it. When her phone vibrated with a message from Daniel, she ignored it. Her attention was fixed on the man in front of her and the invisible line she had crossed. She knew then this was only the beginning. The apartment had watched her enter, and it would remember her. So would Julian, whether he wanted to or not. The coffee steamed between them, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The city below stretched wide and unaware, while inside the apartment, something fragile hovered between danger and truth. Emma wrapped her fingers around the cup not because she needed warmth, but because she needed something to hold onto. Julian stood across from her, his shoulders tense like he was bracing for impact, even though no threat had entered his territory except her. She noticed how he did everything with intention, the way he set the cup down exactly aligned, the way his eyes kept drifting to the entrance, as if expecting interruption. This was not habit, this was survival built into muscle and bone. Emma understood then that the calm he carried was not peace, it was control earned through years of refusing to relax. She broke the silence by asking him why coffee mattered so much to him, and for a second he looked surprised by the question, as if no one had ever asked him. Anything so simple. He told her his mother taught him this ritual, that mornings were the only time the world paused long enough to remember who you were before power demanded something from you. His voice lowered when he spoke about her, and Emma felt the shift. Grief moved through the room like a quiet shadow. She asked about his mother gently, and he answered without looking at her, saying she believed discipline was love and that chaos destroyed families. That was the moment Emma saw it clearly. The empire, the walls, the silence, they were all built to honor a woman who feared violence more than death. The conversation felt intimate, not because of closeness, but because of restraint. Every word he shared cost him something. Emma realized he was not used to being seen without permission. She told him she came because she was tired of being invisible to him, because every time their eyes met at family gatherings, it felt like something unsaid pressed between them. Julian immediately pulled back, reminding her she was Daniel's sister, reminding himself more than her. His voice hardened, but his hands betrayed him, gripping the counter like he was holding himself in place. Then his phone vibrated and everything changed. He did not look at the screen at first, but Emma saw it in his posture, the shift from man to leader. When he finally answered, his voice became cold, precise, lethal in its calm. He spoke in fragments about a betrayal, about someone moving without approval, about consequences. Emma listened in silence, her chest tight. This was the man behind the mask, the one who commanded fear without raising his voice. When the call ended, the quiet that followed was heavier than before. Emma looked at him and for the first time did not look away. She told him she heard the difference in his voice, and that she was not afraid of it. She said power did not scare her, emptiness did. Julian stared at her as if she had struck something deep and dangerous inside him. He told her she did not belong in this world, that his life was built on decisions that ruined people, that caring was a weakness. Emma stepped closer, not touching him, but close enough that he could feel her presence. She said loneliness was a worse weakness. He asked her why she kept coming, why she would step into something that could destroy her, and Emma answered honestly. She said because she wanted to know the man who carried so much weight alone, because she saw how he protected everyone else while refusing protection himself, because some part of him had been guarding her long before she ever noticed. And she wanted to understand why. Julian closed his eyes briefly, like he was fighting something internal, something older than logic. He told her she should leave before he made a mistake, and Emma nodded, knowing he meant himself, not her. She walked toward the door, slowly aware that something irreversible had begun. She paused at the entrance and told him she was not there to be rescued or ruined. She was there by choice. When the door closed behind her, Julian remained standing in the same place, staring at nothing, knowing the fortress he built had just been breached, not by force, but by truth. Emma did not plan the next visits. They happened the way habits are formed, quietly, repeatedly, until they no longer feel strange. Each morning she told herself she would not go back, and each morning she found a reason that felt reasonable enough to ignore the warning in her chest. Once her laptop stopped working and she convinced herself she needed his advice because he understood systems better than anyone. Another time she showed up with food, saying her grandmother had made too much and it would go to waste. The excuses were thin, but her calm made them believable. Julian never invited her in the same way twice. Sometimes he hesitated too long before opening the door. Sometimes he opened it immediately, like he had been waiting. His eyes always scanned the hallway before focusing on her, and each time he saw her standing there unharmed, something tight in his face loosened before he caught it. He warned her again and again that she should stop coming. That attention in his world spread like infection. Emma listened and stayed anyway. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere changed slowly, not enough for him to notice at first. The sterile quiet softened. A book she brought stayed on the table instead of being moved away. A mug she used once appeared washed and placed back where she could reach it. Julian still kept his distance, but his body betrayed him. He walked her to the elevator even when he pretended he had other things to do. He asked if she ate before she came. Once he adjusted her coat collar without thinking and froze when he realized what he had done. Emma noticed something else too. Every time she left, there was a man across the street pretending not to watch the building. Always the same posture, always the same car, always a fraction too still. The first time she thought she imagined it. The second time she memorized his face. By the third time she understood this was not coincidence. The fortress did not only protect Julian, it drew attention. She mentioned it casually one morning, asking if he always had people nearby. Julian stiffened immediately. His eyes went sharp, his jaw set, and Emma saw the shift she had learned to recognize. Leader, not host, protector, not man. He told her she needed to stop coming now, not later now. His voice was low but urgent, and for the first time fear entered his control. Not fear for himself, fear for her. Emma did not argue, she simply asked why. The question hit harder than any accusation. Julian turned away, running a hand through his hair, breathing like he was counting something inside himself. He said there were people who noticed patterns and that her presence created one. He said men like him did not get to want things without consequences. Emma listened and realized he was not pushing her away because he did not want her. He was pushing her away because he did. That night as she walked home, she felt eyes on her again, closer this time. Her phone vibrated with a message from Julian asking where she was and if she was alone. The timing was too precise to ignore. Emma typed back that she was fine even though her steps quickened. The car engine started behind her and then stopped just as suddenly. Nothing happened, but the threat lingered like a held breath. The next morning, Julian stood at his window watching the street long after the city woke up. He realized the line had already been crossed. Emma was no longer outside his world. She was inside the danger of it, and for the first time in years, the thing he feared most was not losing control. It was losing her. The morning Emma discovered the library, the city was still wrapped in fog, and Julian looked more guarded than usual, as if he had not slept. He let her in without a word and locked the door behind her with a movement that felt heavier than before. Something had shifted since the night she felt watched, and they both knew it. Danger was no longer theoretical, it was breathing near them. Julian moved through the apartment, checking corners, window systems, not for show but from instinct. Emma watched quietly, understanding that this was how he loved, through vigilance, through control, through staying ahead of threats no one else could see. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, asking if she had been followed again. She answered honestly, saying she did not know, and that uncertainty frightened her more than anything definite. He exhaled slowly and told her there were parts of his life she could not wander into without consequences. Then, without meaning to, he led her down a corridor she had never seen before. A wall slid open, revealing a hidden room, and Emma felt the air change immediately. This place was warmer, softer, lined with shelves filled with books, not weapons, not ledgers, but stories. First editions, worn spines, margins filled with handwritten notes. The room felt like a secret kept alive against the rest of the world. Emma stepped inside like she was entering a confession. Her fingers hovered over the spines and then stopped when she saw it, the book she had loved since she was 17, the one she reread when she felt lost. Her breath caught as she pulled it free and looked at him in disbelief. He told her quietly that Daniel once mentioned it years ago in passing, and that Julian remembered. He said he bought it not knowing why, only that it felt important. Something inside Emma cracked open. This was not coincidence, this was attention carried across time. She turned to him, her voice unsteady, asking how long he had been watching her from a distance. Julian did not answer immediately, and in that pause she felt the truth gathering weight. When he finally spoke, he said some people were impossible to ignore even when you tried. The space between them shrank without either of them moving. Julian lifted his hand and stopped just short of her face, as if asking permission without words. Emma nodded, and his fingers touched her cheek with a gentleness that did not belong to a man feared across the city. The moment stretched fragile and electric. He told her that if he crossed this line, nothing in his world would remain untouched, that desire was not safe in his position. Emma answered softly that safety had never been the point. Before he could respond, a sharp sound cut through the room, not loud but urgent. A hidden door opened, and one of his men appeared, pale and tense, speaking quickly about a breached location, a compromised route, a name Julian recognized instantly. The softness vanished from his face, replaced by command. Julian turned to Emma, his hands gripping her shoulders, grounding, her eyes fierce with urgency. He told her she had to leave now, not later, not after coffee now. Emma tried to argue, but he cut her off, not unkindly, but firmly, saying this was the part of his life she could not witness yet. She saw the fear beneath his control and realized this was protection, not rejection. As she walked back toward the elevator, escorted by silence, she felt the weight of what almost happened and what had been interrupted. Behind her, Julian stood alone in the hidden room, staring at the space where she had been, knowing he had come closer to losing control than ever before. The library door closed, sealing the secret again, but the damage was done. The fortress had revealed its heart, and the heart had almost chosen love. The birthday dinner was supposed to be simple, a familiar ritual, a safe space where Emma could breathe without thinking about watch streets and hidden doors. But the moment Julian stepped inside Daniel's apartment, the air shifted in a way only Emma seemed to notice. He was dressed carefully, restrained as always, but there was tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. His eyes moved through the room, mapping exits, habits, threats, even here among family and laughter. Emma sat across from him at the table. The candlelight caught the sharp lines of his face and softened them just enough to make her chest ache. Every time their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them, a memory of the library, a touch that never finished, a warning that arrived too late. Daniel talked easily, unaware of the weight pressing between his sister and his closest friend. He laughed, praised Julian for always having his back, for making things easier for the family, for being someone he trusted without question. Each word felt like a tightening knot in Emma's chest. She saw Julian flinch almost imperceptibly when Daniel called her his baby sister. The guilt in his eyes was sharp enough to hurt. This was the trap of trust, the place where loyalty turned into a blade. Emma realized then that loving Julian did not just risk her heart, it threatened to fracture the only family she had ever known. Halfway through dinner, Daniel mentioned trouble in the city, rival names whispered in legal circles, cases that appeared then vanished. Julian responded calmly, but Emma felt the shift immediately. His hand tightened around his glass, his jaw set. Danger had followed them to the table, even if it stayed silent. She wondered how many times he had done this before, smiling while calculating survival. When Daniel left the room to take a call, the silence rushed in, fast and heavy. Julian stood at the sink, pretending to rinse dishes that were already clean. Emma followed, her voice low but steady, asking how long he planned to keep pretending nothing was happening between them. Julian did not turn around. He said this could not continue, that Daniel trusted him with everything, including her safety, and he was already failing. Emma stepped closer and told him that protecting her did not mean erasing her choice. She said she was not something fragile to be hidden away. Julian finally faced her, and the conflict in his eyes was raw, uncontrolled. He told her loving her was the most dangerous mistake he had ever made. She answered that denying it was worse. The space between them collapsed without either of them deciding to move. Julian reached for her like surrender, like a man letting go of the last wall holding him upright. The kiss was not gentle, it was restrained desperation, months of silence breaking all at once. Emma felt the weight of him, the fear, the hunger, the guilt, all tangled together. For one suspended moment, nothing else existed. Then reality crashed back. Footsteps, voices, Daniel returning. Julian pulled away, instantly, control snapping back into place, but something had changed. The line had been crossed, and neither of them could pretend otherwise. Emma saw it in his eyes, a promise and a warning combined. As Julian left later that night, he squeezed her hand, once brief, hidden, but full of meaning. Emma stood in the doorway watching him disappear into the city, knowing the safest lie of their lives had ended. The battle for restraint was over. What came next would demand truth, and it would not be kind. Emma woke before sunrise with her heart already racing. The kiss from the night before still burned on her lips like a secret that refused to stay buried. She knew what had to happen next, and the knowing felt heavier than fear. Honesty was the only path left, and it was the most dangerous one of all. Julian called her just after dawn, his voice low, tight, stripped of all distance. He told her to come to the apartment not as a visitor, not with excuses, but because they needed to face what they had done, and what it meant. When she arrived, the fortress felt different, the silence sharper, the air restless, like it sensed a storm approaching. Julian stood by the window. When she entered, his back straight, his hands clenched at his sides like he was preparing for impact. He told her they could not hide, not even for a moment longer. In his world, secrets grew teeth and destroyed everything they touched. He said Daniel deserved the truth, because he was the one person whose trust mattered more than power or survival. Emma saw how much this cost him, and realized this was the bravest thing Julian had ever done. Not violence, not command, but choosing integrity over control. They planned their words carefully, not to soften the truth, but to respect it. Julian refused to minimize what he felt, and Emma refused to let him carry the weight alone. When the time came, she reached for his hand, grounding him, reminding him that this choice belonged to both of them. Together, they would stand or fall side by side. Daniel arrived, uneasy, sensing tension. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes moved between them, lingering on their linked hands, suspicion igniting fast. Emma spoke first, her voice steady. As she told him there was something he needed to hear, something that would change everything. Julian followed her words with his own, confessing without hesitation, without excuses, saying he loved her, and had tried to resist for weeks because of loyalty, because of fear, because of respect. The silence that followed was violent in its own way. Daniel's face shifted from confusion to anger to disbelief. His voice rose, demanding explanations, demanding timelines, demanding to know how far it had gone. Emma answered every question without flinching, refusing to be spoken over, refusing to shrink. She told him she chose this, that she was not manipulated, not naive, not a child asking permission. Daniel turned on Julian with fury, accusing him of betrayal, of abuse, of crossing lines that could never be uncrossed. Julian took every word without defending himself, until Daniel accused him of endangering her. That was when Julian finally spoke again, his voice calm but unyielding. He said he would burn his entire empire to the ground before letting harm come to Emma, and if that meant losing Daniel forever, he would accept it. That admission landed harder than any argument. Daniel froze, realizing the depth of what Julian was offering, not justification, not dominance, but sacrifice. Emma stepped forward, placing herself between them, saying this was not about choosing sides, but about respecting her agency. Daniel's anger cracked under the weight of it all, and something like fear surfaced, fear of losing both the sister he loved and the friend he trusted. He demanded proof, not promises, proof that Julian could protect her without caging her, without pulling her into darkness. Julian agreed without hesitation, saying Emma would remain free even if it destroyed him. Hearing that Emma understood the truth fully, Julian loved her not as possession, but as purpose. When Daniel finally left, he did not give approval, but he did not sever ties either. The door closed behind him. Heavy, unresolved, Emma collapsed against Julian, her hands shaking, and he held her like she was something sacred, something he had nearly lost. Outside, the city continued unaware, but inside the fortress, something fundamental had changed. Secrecy was gone, replaced by risk and truth. The war had not ended, it had only just begun. The days after the confession felt unreal, like walking through a city after an earthquake where the streets still stood, but everything underneath had shifted. Emma returned to campus, but the world she moved through no longer felt separate from Julian's. Every shadow felt heavier, every pause too long. She felt eyes on her more often, now not imagined, not distant, but deliberate. Julian changed immediately, but not in the way Emma expected. He did not tighten her world, he loosened his. Men appeared where they had not before, but always at a distance, never crowding, never restricting. Routes changed, schedules shifted, yet Emma still moved freely. He watched from the edges like a man guarding something fragile without locking it away. That restraint terrified him more than violence ever had. One evening as Emma walked back from the library, she felt it clearly, the presence behind her footsteps that matched her pace then slowed when she slowed. Her phone vibrated once, a single message from Julian asking where she was and if anyone was with her. She answered calmly even as her pulse quickened. The car rolled past her slowly, windows dark, unreadable, and then vanished into traffic, leaving behind a silence that screamed threat. When she arrived at the apartment, Julian was already there waiting, his calm stretched thin, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. She told him everything without softening it, and he listened without interrupting. Then he closed his eyes briefly like he was counting something inside himself, not rage, not fear, but control. He told her this was no longer coincidence, someone was testing boundaries, sending messages not to him but through her. Emma asked if this was her fault, and Julian answered instantly no. He said she was not the danger, she was the leverage. That truth settled heavy in her chest, but she did not step back. Instead, she told him she wanted to know everything, not rumors, not half-truths. She wanted to stand inside reality, not behind it. Julian finally agreed, and the weight of that decision showed on his face. He explained rival families were circling, sensing weakness, sensing change. A man who chose love could be tested. A man who protected openly could be challenged. Emma listened and realized this was the cost of being seen. Love made him visible. The next morning, an attempt was made on Julian's car, not dramatic, not explosive, just precise enough to send a message. Emma was inside with him when it happened, the sharp sound, the sudden swerve, the controlled recovery. The driver never showed himself. The message had already been delivered. Emma's hand trembled for the first time, and Julian covered it with his own, grounding her with presence, not panic. That night, Julian ordered an internal lockdown, not of her but of information. Routes, schedules, loyalties, everything Ray examined. Emma watched him work, saw the weight of command settle on his shoulders, and understood how much he carried alone. She also noticed something else, subtle but dangerous. Someone close was leaking details only a trusted circle would know. Daniel called later that evening, his voice uneasy, telling them he had noticed strange movements around old legal cases, things reopening that should have stayed buried. Julian realized then this was no random threat. It was coordinated, calculated, and personal. Someone was reaching backward through history, not forward. Emma sat beside Julian, listening to names, dates, alliances long dissolved. Fear should have taken her, but instead something steadier formed, resolve. She told him she would not run, not now, not after choosing truth. Julian looked at her like she had just rewritten the rules of his world. As the city slept unaware, the fortress shifted again, not closing but preparing. The Watcher had stepped closer, the game had begun, and Emma understood one undeniable truth. This chapter of their story would be written in blood or in choice, and she intended to choose him even if the world tried to claim her as the price. Julian did not sleep that night, and Emma knew it before he said anything. The air around him felt heavier, like memory had weight. When morning came, he moved through the apartment slowly, not checking doors, not scanning windows, but carrying something older than fear. Emma watched him from the kitchen table, sensing that the danger circling them was no longer only outside. He finally sat across from her and told her there was a reason he had stayed distant all these years, a reason he never allowed himself to touch what he wanted most. His voice was steady, but his hands were not. He said, before power, before control, before the city learned his name, there was his mother, and there was a choice she made that reshaped everything. Emma listened without interrupting as he spoke about a night long before she could remember, a night when alliances collapsed and bloodlines were marked for erasure. His mother had been part of that world, not as a weapon but as a conscience. When violence was ordered, she refused, and refusal in that world was a death sentence. She hid someone that night, a child whose existence threatened balance and pride. Julian told Emma his mother did not die the way records claimed. She was killed for choosing mercy over loyalty. The truth had been buried under paperwork, silence, and fear. Julian became what the world demanded, not because he wanted power, but because he wanted to stop the cycle from repeating. Every rule he enforced, every line he never crossed was shaped by that loss. Emma felt the room tilt slightly as the story settled into her chest. She asked quietly why he was telling her this now. Julian answered because the threat circling them was not random, and because secrets had begun to surface that were never meant to be found. That afternoon Daniel arrived with a folder, his face pale, his confidence fractured. He had been reviewing sealed files tied to an old case, one he never fully understood because it had been dismissed before it reached trial. Something in the paperwork felt wrong: names altered, timelines shifted, parental records inconsistent. He said one name kept appearing like a shadow, and that name was Julian's mother. The three of them sat together as Daniel laid out what he had found. Adoption documents rewritten, hospital records missing, witness statements erased. Emma felt a strange pressure behind her eyes as pieces began to align in ways that felt impossible. Daniel looked at her, then at Julian, and asked a question that changed the air completely. Why was his mother involved with our family before Emma was born? Julian closed his eyes, and Emma knew the moment had arrived. He told Daniel the truth he had never planned to speak. Emma was not simply Daniel's sister by chance. Her life had been altered before she could speak, before memory formed. The child his mother saved that night had been Emma. Her identity had been protected, rewritten, folded into another family to keep her alive. Silence fell thick and absolute. Daniel stared at his sister like he was seeing her for the first time, grief, confusion, disbelief crashing together. Emma felt the floor beneath her steady even as the world cracked open. Her entire life had been guarded from the shadows by a promise she never knew existed. Julian said he had stayed near the family because of that vow, to protect without claiming, to watch without touching. Falling in love with her had been the one thing he never allowed himself to consider because it violated everything he believed he owed his mother. Daniel's anger dissolved into something quieter and more painful: understanding. Emma reached for Julian's hand, grounding him the way he had grounded her so many times before. She told them both she would not be defined by bloodlines or secrets or fear. She said if her life had been saved once, she would not waste it hiding from truth. Outside, the city moved unaware, but inside the fortress the past had finally caught up. The watcher circling them was no longer just a rival, it was history demanding resolution. And Emma understood one final thing. Love had not found her by accident, it had been guarding her all along. The truth did not explode, it settled heavy and permanent like a seal pressed into wax. Emma felt strangely calm as the final pieces aligned, not because it was easy, but because it finally made sense. The protection, the silence, the distance Julian had carried all these years, it was never random, it was devotion disguised as restraint. Julian stood apart now, his posture stripped of authority, stripped of command. He looked like a man waiting for judgment, not from the city, not from enemies, but from the woman whose life he had guarded without permission. He told her he would understand if she walked away, if she chose freedom without him, because loving her had already broken every vow he ever made to his mother. Emma stepped toward him slowly, deliberately, each step a choice. She told him her life had never been simple even before she knew the truth, and she would not pretend it should be now. She said she would not trade choice for safety or love for ignorance. She had been protected once without consent, and now she chose consciously, fully him. Daniel watched them, his world reshaping in real time. Grief moved through him, not because Emma was no longer his sister, but because he realized how close he had come to losing her without ever knowing why. He spoke quietly, saying he needed time to understand blood and truth and lies, but he knew one thing clearly: Julian had never stopped protecting her, even when it hurt him most. The call came that night, confirming what Julian already suspected. The rival family had uncovered fragments of the past and wanted leverage, not war yet. Emma was no longer a secret, she was a symbol, and symbols were dangerous. The city would soon know something had shifted, even if it did not yet know what. Julian prepared for conflict not with violence first but with exposure. He began dismantling old alliances, leaking truths, strategically ending cycles his mother had died trying to stop. Emma stood beside him, not hidden, not silent, present, and unafraid. For the first time, the fortress was not only a place of defense, it was a declaration. When the confrontation finally came, it did not happen in blood but in public collapse. Evidence surfaced, records restored, names reclaimed. The rival lost power when the truth stripped them of legitimacy. The city did not erupt, it exhaled, as if relieved to see the darkness lose its grip. Afterward, the apartment changed slowly. The silence softened, light stayed longer, laughter appeared where only vigilance had lived. Julian no longer ruled alone, and Emma no longer questioned her place. Love did not weaken him, it anchored him. Daniel returned weeks later, calmer, older somehow, and gave them his blessing, not because everything made sense, but because he saw peace where fear had lived. He told Emma she was still his sister, still his family, no matter the past. She hugged him, knowing some bonds were chosen and some were unbreakable. The final choice came quietly. Julian offered to step away from power entirely to give Emma a life untouched by shadows. Emma refused, gently telling him she did not want a man who ran from himself. She wanted a partner who chose differently every day. They stood together on the balcony, watching the city lights shift, knowing the war had ended but vigilance would remain. Love had not erased danger, but it had transformed it. Emma had opened a door that should never have been opened and found not destruction but truth. Julian had guarded her life without touching it, and in the end she chose him freely. Their story did not end in safety, it ended in choice, and that was the most powerful ending of all.